Hi there, everybody. My name is Tim. I'm a librarian from High Plains Library District. Welcome to our VR world, where we're coming at you with our National Developmental Disability Awareness Month interview. Join us next week for an interview about National Women's History Month. With me today, I have outreach librarian Lindy, and she is here just to discuss a little bit about what this month is, why we celebrate it, and why it's important to her as well. So without further ado, we're just going to jump right into this interview. Thank you just so much for joining me today, Lindy.
Thank you for having me.
So like I said, this month is National Developmental Disability Awareness Month. Can you just explain a little bit about why that's significant and important in the United States and why it's significant or important to you personally?
Yeah, so National Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month is important not just because it highlights the way that people with disabilities enrich and contribute to our community, but it also raises awareness to the barriers that people with developmental disabilities continue to face every day.
Awesome, thank you so much. And can you explain kind of why this is an important month for you personally?
Yeah, personally, this celebrating developmental disability awareness is important to me because I have a family member with developmental disabilities that's very important to me. And I want him to be able to have the best life possible without restrictions or prejudice. People with disabilities have so much that they can contribute to society, but it's hard to do that when they're treated differently.
Absolutely. So in that kind of theme, what are some things that you want people to be aware of when it comes to intellectual and developmental disability? Just because this month isn't just about developmental disability, it's also about intellectual disabilities. So what are some things you think are important for people to know about that population?
Absolutely. I think the most important thing is just that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are regular people. They have the same dreams, interests, emotions. You don't need to talk down to them or feel uncomfortable when you're around them. Usually when people feel uncomfortable, it's because they feel some kind of pity or they want to feel sorry for them. Once you get to know people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, you really get to know that they're just normal people and you'll get over the uncomfortableness.
That's amazing. And something you and I had discussed at one point that wasn't on the questions I sent you is people first language, and that's something I've been working to get better at, and I think it's something all of us can get better at. Just real quick, do you feel comfortable just explaining what people first language is?
So people first language is, when you're talking about people with disabilities or people that are blind, instead of saying things, like, that wheelchaired person or that person, a blind person, you would say that person who is in a wheelchair or that person who is blind, because that's not their entire identity. But really, even if you use outdated terms or you don't use people first language, don't let that stop you from having a good interaction with people with disabilities, because everyone has different preferences for what they prefer to be referred to as or called. And if you make a mistake, just apologize and just be genuine about it, and it's a really forgiving group.
Yeah, and I think that's a lesson we've been learning as a library district and as professionals and as individuals with a lot of different groups of people, that people first language, and when you mess up, acknowledge that you mess up and move on. Awesome, thank you. So I know in the library you work with some people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and as you said, you have a family member with IDD, and so I was just wondering what are some lessons that you personally have learned? Maybe a mistake you made, or one of those instances where you were corrected, and just kind of the lesson you learned from that.
Yeah, right. As I mentioned before, I have an uncle with Down syndrome, who I grew up living next door to. So I've learned so much just from him. I've learned not just about people with disabilities, but just good life lessons. I've learned more about being patient and having empathy and the power of having dreams. My uncle, he is such a dreamer, and he always reminds me that it's never too late to give up on your dreams, and no matter what, you always have your dreams. As I mentioned before, patience is something that I've learned a lot with my uncle and with working through the library with people with disabilities. Is sometimes when you're explaining things to people or you're having a discussion, they take a little more time to understand or think about what you're discussing. So it's really good to give them, a few more seconds to comprehend things. And sometimes, if it's not sticking, then you have to go through a different perspective to try to get your communication across.
So what I'm hearing you say really is that patience is the first and most important thing when you're interacting with anyone who you may have difficulty communicating with. Just giving them the benefit of the doubt and explaining things multiple times, maybe in different ways, but just not getting frustrated while it happens.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good lesson, just communicating with anyone, is to have patience. And sometimes if people aren't understanding what you're saying, to try a different approach and explain things in a different way. Not just with people with disabilities, but it helps with people. When just talking with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, sometimes a good rule of thumb is to give them 3 or 4 seconds extra before you ask a second question or a follow-up question.
Okay, that's really great to know. Thank you. So now kind of into the broader scope of things. I know I want to come alongside the community with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I want to be considered an ally of that community. So what are some ways that those of us who do want to come alongside and help this community or support this community, journey with them, what are some ways that we can do that just kind of in our day-to-day lives?
Absolutely. First of all, you can be an advocate. You can support local groups that work with or support people with disabilities. You can, work on helping get legislation and more policies for people with disabilities, and really encourage businesses and organizations in the community, as well as wherever you work and wherever you live, to be more accessible for people with disabilities, whether they have intellectual disabilities, or maybe they're in a wheelchair, or maybe they have low vision. Accessibility is really something that we as a society need to improve on. Another way to support the community, other than being an advocate, is just being a friend. The best way to get to know someone with disabilities is just to get to know them, be their friend, talk to them, invite them to do things with you. If you just see someone in the grocery store, give them a smile or say something kind to them.
Yeah, that sounds like it goes back to that people first language. It's not just we want to use our language with people first, but we want to change our thought process so that we're thinking of them as people first.
Absolutely.
And so we want to be friends with them just like we want to be friends with any other person. Just knowing that friendship might look a little different, or maybe at times might require a little more patience, but at the end of the day, they're just people that want friends as well. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Now, finally, the last question I have for you is, we are here in Greeley, Weld County, High Plains Library District. So are you aware of any organizations or groups or places people can go if they want to donate their time or their money to helping people with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities?
Absolutely. There are a ton of organizations here in Weld County and Greeley that support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's the ARC of Weld County. Even by just shopping at ARC thrift stores or donating items there, donating money, they hire people with disabilities, and their funding goes towards supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's also Envision, who does a lot of amazing things for people with disabilities, as well as Connections for Independent Living, who serve northeastern Colorado, many counties across the northeastern part of the state. And then also the Special Olympics is another great organization to support.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And just before we wrap up, I first just want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come and join us for a discussion that I know you find valuable, and I think we all at the library find very valuable. But is there any closing sentiments or thoughts or ideas that you just want to put out there before we end today?
Yeah, I just want to stress the importance of realizing and recognizing that people with disabilities are normal people. If you treat them like regular people and you treat them like peers, then you'll open a whole new world to yourself and for them. As well as accessibility is really important for people with disabilities, but also just for anyone, because making things accessible makes it accessible for everyone. So whether you're making a sign, using images or color contrasts that are easier for people with low vision or people who can't read to understand the message of the sign, or if you're posting something online like a video or a picture, to use alternative text or subtitles, or even making sure businesses and public places are physically accessible for people with walkers or wheelchairs. Accessibility is very important, and once we make things accessible for everyone, then everyone can access it.
Awesome. Well, I think that gives us all a lot to think about, a lot to look into, and I know I'll be taking a look at a lot of the things we do here at the library and kind of looking a little more closely with an accessibility lens as I move forward with that. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lindy. I hope that we can have you back to have another interview about something else in our VR world with these VR interviews. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you guys next time. We will be interviewing another librarian for National Women's History Month next week. So go ahead and join us for that next time. Thank you all so much. Goodbye.